I was bleeding on the road, calling my wife again and again, 17 times. She didn't pick up once. But the real shock wasn't the accident. It was who finally showed up and what he knew about her. There's a harsh truth most people don't want to accept. You don't really know who someone is until life puts you in a moment where you have nothing left to give and everything to lose. It's easy to look loyal when things are normal, when conversations are light, when problems are small and manageable. Anyone can say I'm here for you when being there doesn't cost them anything. But the real test comes in the moments that are inconvenient, uncomfortable, or even painful when showing up requires effort, sacrifice, or attention they'd rather give somewhere else. In my case, it wasn't a small test. It was life or death. I wasn't calling my wife to chat. I wasn't checking in or being needy. I was lying there, broken, scared, and desperate, reaching out to the one person I believed would always pick up. 17 times I called, and every single time, the silence on the other end grew heavier. At first, you make excuses for them. Maybe they're busy. Maybe their phone is on silent. Maybe they didn't notice. Your mind tries to protect you from the truth by creating softer explanations. But as the calls go unanswered, something deeper starts to settle in. A quiet realization that this might not be accidental. That's when it shifts from confusion to something much more painful. It becomes awareness. Because deep down, you already know how quickly they respond when it matters to them. You've seen how fast they pick up calls from others, how engaged they can be when they want to be. So when they don't show up for you, especially in a critical moment, it's no longer about missed calls. It's about priority. It's about where you stand in their life when things aren't easy. Loyalty isn't proven in comfort. It's proven in crisis. When someone chooses to be there for you at your lowest point, when there's nothing glamorous about the situation, when you have nothing to offer them except your vulnerability, that's real. That's when their presence actually means something. Because at that point, they're not showing up for convenience or image. They're showing up because they genuinely care. What makes moments like that so defining is how they strip away all illusions. You stop seeing the version of the person you hoped they were, and you start seeing who they actually are. Not through words, not through promises, but through acts or the lack of it. And actions in those moments are impossible to fake. No one accidentally ignores 17 calls from someone they truly prioritize. Not when their instinct is to respond, to check, to care. It also forces you to confront something uncomfortable about yourself. You realize how much you depended on that person emotionally, how much trust you placed in them without questioning whether it was truly earned. It's not just their absence that hurts, it's the collapse of the belief you built around them. The version of your life where your safety net suddenly disappears, and you're left standing on something that feels unstable and unfamiliar. At the same time, there's a strange kind of clarity that comes with that pain. As brutal as it is, it removes the guesswork. You no longer have to wonder where you stand. You don't have to analyze mixed signals or second-guess their behavior. In that moment, everything becomes clear in the simplest, most undeniable way. They either showed up or they didn't. And that truth, as hard as it is to accept, becomes something you can finally build on, because at least now, it's real. What people often misunderstand is that loyalty isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about consistency in moments that don't benefit them. It's about answering the call, being present, choosing you when it's inconvenient. Because anyone can claim they care, but very few will prove it when it actually matters. And when someone fails that test, especially in a moment where you had no one else to turn to, it leaves a mark that doesn't fade easily. That kind of experience changes the way you see relationships. You become more aware of who truly deserves your trust and who was only there when it was easy. You start valuing actions over words, presence over promises. And while it may make you more guarded, it also makes you more grounded in reality. You stop holding on to people based on potential or history and start seeing them based on what they actually do when it counts. In the end, those moments don't just reveal others, they redefine you. They teach you that being there for someone, it isn't about convenience, it's about choice. And when someone repeatedly chooses not to be there, especially when you needed them the most, it tells you everything you need to know without them saying a single word. People often reduce betrayal to a single act: cheating, lying, or crossing a visible line, but that definition is too narrow to capture what it really feels like when it happens. The deeper wound isn't always the act itself. It's the absence that surrounds it. It's the realization that while you were struggling, hurting, or reaching out, the person who was supposed to stand beside you chose not to be there. That absence carries a weight that no apology can fully erase, because it reveals something far more personal than a mistake. It reveals a choice. In moments of crisis, you don't just need someone physically present. You need them emotionally available, aware, and willing to respond. When that presence is missing, especially from someone who promised to be there, It creates a kind of emptiness that feels almost louder than any argument or confrontation. You begin to question not just their actions, but their priorities, their intentions, and the foundation of everything you thought you shared. It's not just they did something wrong. It becomes they weren't there when it mattered most, and that difference changes everything. Cheating, on its own, is already painful because it breaks trust. But when it happens at the same time you're going through your worst moment, it stops being just about disloyalty in a relationship. It becomes something much more severe, a demonstration that your pain, your existence in that moment, wasn't important enough to interrupt what they were doing. That's what transforms it into a deeper form of betrayal. It's not just what they did, it's what they didn't do. They didn't answer. They didn't check. They didn't care enough to notice something was wrong. That kind of absence forces you to confront a difficult truth about emotional investment. Relationships are built on the idea that when one person falls, the other will step in. Not perfectly, not always in the right way, but at least with the intention to be there. When that doesn't happen, it creates a fracture that goes beyond trust. It damages your sense of safety. You start to realize that in the moment you needed support the most, you were effectively alone. Even though you were supposed to have someone by your side, there's also a psychological impact that comes with this kind of betrayal. It makes you replay the moment over and over, not just the act of cheating, but the timing of it. You think about the calls that went unanswered, the silence that stretched longer than it should have, the gap between your need and their response or lack of one. That gap becomes symbolic. It represents the distance between how much you cared and how much they were willing to show up. And once you see that clearly, it's almost impossible to go back to believing things were ever equal. What hurts even more is that absence is rarely loud. There's no dramatic confrontation in the moment, no immediate explanation, just silence. And silence leaves space for your mind to fill in the blanks. You start asking questions that don't have easy answers. Were they thinking about you at all? Did they see your name on the screen and choose to ignore it? Or were you simply not important enough to cross their mind in that moment? Each possibility cuts in a different way, but all of them lead to the same conclusion. You were not where you thought you were in their life. This kind of betrayal also strips away the illusion of partnership. It shows that the relationship may have been unbalanced for longer than you realized. One person was emotionally present, invested, and available, while the other was already drifting away. Even before the obvious act of cheating happened, the absence during your worst moment isn't it's the final proof of a disconnect that had been growing quietly over time. That at the same time, it forces a shift in how you define loyalty. You begin to understand that loyalty isn't just about avoiding betrayal in obvious ways. It's about being present when it's difficult, when it's inconvenient, when there's no immediate reward for showing up. It's about choosing the person you're committed to, even when there are distractions, temptations, or easier options. When someone fails to do that, especially in a critical moment, it shows that their commitment wasn't as strong as it appeared. The hardest part is accepting that you can't negotiate your way out of that realization. Once you've seen that level of absence, once you've felt what it's like to reach out and get nothing in return, something changes in how you perceive that person. Even if they apologize, even if they try to explain, the memory of that moment stays intact. It becomes a reference point that you can't ignore because it represents a truth that was revealed under pressure. In a way, that abstinence becomes more defining than the act of cheating itself. Because cheating can be explained, justified, or framed as a mistake. But absence in a moment of need feels intentional, even if it wasn't planned that way. It feels like a decision, whether conscious or not, to place something else above the person who needed you most. And once you recognize that, it becomes impossible to see the relationship in the same light again. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that a complete stranger can show you more care, urgency, and humanity than someone who has been part of your life for years. It challenges a belief most people carry without questioning, that closeness automatically equals compassion, that history guarantees loyalty, and that the people who know you best will naturally be the ones who step up when it matters. But reality doesn't always follow that logic. Sometimes, the person who owes you nothing becomes the one who does everything, while the person who promised you everything disappears when you need them most. What makes this contrast so powerful is how unexpected it is. You don't prepare yourself for a stranger to play a significant role in your life, especially not in a critical moment. There's no emotional contract, no shared memories, no obligation. Yet when that person chooses to act with hesitation, without overthinking, it exposes something raw and undeniable about human nature. It shows that empathy isn't reserved for close relationships. It exists independently, driven by awareness, character, and the ability to recognize another person's pain and respond to it at the same time. It forces you to reevaluate the people you've relied on. When someone close to you fails to show up, especially in a moment of urgency. It creates a vacuum, and when that vacuum is filled by a stranger, the comparison becomes unavoidable. You start to question what connection really means. Is it time spent together? Is it shared experiences? Or is it the willingness to act when it counts? In that moment, the stranger didn't just offer help. They demonstrated a level of presence that the person closest to you failed to provide. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you experience this kind of unexpected support. You realize that kindness doesn't always come from where you expect it. It's not always tied to relationships, titles, or roles. Instead, it often comes from individuals who are simply paying attention, who haven't become numb to the needs of others, and who are willing to step forward when they see something is wrong. That awareness is powerful because it breaks the assumption that you can predict who will be there for you based on proximity alone. In situations like this, the stranger's actions feel almost amplified because of the context. When you're vulnerable physically, emotionally, or both, every action carries more weight. A small gesture becomes significant. A decision to help becomes life-changing. And because there's no expectation attached to it, it feels genuine. In a way that's hard to question, the stranger didn't help because they had to. They helped because they chose to. And that choice stands in sharp contrast to the absence of someone who had every reason to be there, but WASN. Single quotes, T. It also highlights an uncomfortable truth about familiarity. Over time, people who are close to you can become desensitized to your presence. They assume you'll be fine, that you'll manage, that you don't require immediate attention. That assumption can lead to neglect, not always intentional, but still damaging. Meanwhile, a stranger sees the situation without that filter. They don't carry assumptions about your strength or independence. They simply see a problem and respond to it. In that sense, their lack of familiarity becomes an advantage. It allows them to act without hesitation or emotional bias. This kind of experience can reshape your understanding of trust. You start to see that trust isn't just about how long someone has been in your life, but about how they behave in critical moments. A stranger's single act of genuine care can carry more weight than years of inconsistent support from someone you thought you could rely on. It doesn't erase the value of close relationships, but it forces you to differentiate between perceived support and actual support. One is based on assumption, the other on action. There's also a deeper layer to this realization that affects how you see humanity as a whole. It reminds you that even in situations where you feel completely alone, there's still the possibility of connection, even if it comes from unexpected places. It challenges the idea that people are inherently self-centered or indifferent. Because, when a stranger steps in without hesitation, it proves that empathy still exists. Even in environments where you might not expect it, it shows that the capacity to care isn't limited by relationship status. It's a personal choice that anyone can make. At the same time, it doesn't make the absence of your loved one any less painful. If anything, it makes it more noticeable. The contrast between the two becomes sharper. One person stepped forward without obligation, while the other stepped back despite having every reason to stay. That comparison lingers, not just as a memory, but as a reference point for how you evaluate people moving forward. It becomes a quiet standard you carry with you, influencing how you interpret actions, not just words. Over time, this experience can lead to a more grounded perspective on relationships. You become less focused on what people say they'll do and more attentive to what they actually do when it matters. You stop assuming that closeness guarantees reliability, and you start recognizing that reliability is something that has to be demonstrated repeatedly, especially in difficult situations. And while that shift can make you more cautious, it also makes you more aware of genuine kindness when you see it. Regardless of where it comes from ultimately, the presence of a stranger in your darkest moment doesn't just save you in a practical sense. It redefines your understanding of connection, responsibility, and what it truly means to show up for another human being. Pain has a way of interrupting your life without permission. It doesn't ask if you're ready, and it doesn't arrive in a controlled, manageable form. It hits suddenly, often at the worst possible moment, and leaves you disoriented, questioning everything you thought was stable. At first, it feels purely destructive. It breaks routines, shatters expectations, and forces you into a reality you never planned for. In those early moments, it's almost impossible to see anything beyond the damage. All you can focus on is what you've lost, what's been taken from you, and how unfair it feels. But pain doesn't stay static. It evolves, depending on how you respond to it. Initially, it weakens you. It drains your energy, your confidence, your sense of control. You feel smaller, more vulnerable, more exposed than you've ever been. There's a temptation to stay in that state, to let the pain define you completely, because in a strange way, it's easier to collapse under it than to fight your way through it. Giving up requires less effort than rebuilding. Accepting defeat feels simpler than facing the long, uncertain process of recovery. What makes pain so powerful is that it forces you into a decision, even if you don't consciously realize it at first. You either allow it to consume you, shaping your identity around what happened, or you begin the difficult process of reshaping yourself in response to it. Neither path is easy, but only one leads to growth. The turning point doesn't come from the pain itself, it comes from your reaction to it. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What am I going to do now?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. It moves you from a passive state, where things are happening to you, into an active one, where you begin to take control of your direction again. It doesn't erase the pain or make it less real. The damage is still there. The memories don't disappear, but your relationship with that pain starts to change. Instead of something that only holds you back, it becomes something that pushes you forward, even if that push is uncomfortable and slow. There's also a level of self-awareness that comes from going through intense pain. You start to understand your own limits, your triggers, your emotional patterns. You see how you react under pressure, what breaks you, and what keeps you going. That awareness is something you can't gain in comfortable situations. It only comes from being pushed to a point where you have no choice but to confront yourself honestly. And while that process can be uncomfortable, it also gives you a clearer sense of who you are. Pain also strips away illusions. It removes the layers of comfort that can hide reality. You start to see people more clearly, situations more accurately, and yourself more honestly. What once seemed important may lose its value, while things you overlooked before become more meaningful. This shift in perspective is one of the most powerful outcomes of going through hardship. It redefines your priorities, making you less focused on superficial concerns and more grounded in what actually matters. At the same time, there's a resilience that develops over time. Not the kind that makes you feel invincible, but the kind that reminds you that you've survived something difficult before. That memory becomes a reference point. When you face new challenges, you don't approach them as someone who has never struggled, you approach them as someone who has already been tested. That doesn't remove fear or uncertainty, but it gives you a level of confidence that you didn't have before. What's important to understand is that pain doesn't automatically lead to growth. It creates the opportunity for it, but the outcome depends on what you do with that experience. Some people remain stuck in it, replaying the same thoughts, holding on to the same hurt, allowing it to shape their identity in a limiting way. Others use it as a catalyst. Even if they don't realize it at first, they take what happened, process it, and gradually turn it into something that strengthens them instead of weakening them. This transformation isn't about becoming a completely different person. It's about becoming a more aware, more grounded version of yourself. You don't forget what happened, and you don't pretend it didn't affect you. Instead, you integrate it into your understanding of the world and your place in it. The pain becomes part of your story, but it doesn't control the direction of that story anymore. Over time, you start to notice that the same experience that once felt like it was destroying you has also given you something you didn't have before. A clearer sense of boundaries, a deeper understanding of your own strength, a more realistic view of the people around you. These are not things you would have chosen to gain through suffering, but they are outcomes that can emerge if you move through the pain instead of staying stuck in it. In that sense, pain is both a breaking point and a starting point. It disrupts what was, but it also creates space for something new to take shape. Depending on how you respond to it, most people think a comeback has to look dramatic. They imagine revenge, confrontation, proving someone wrong in a way that's loud and undeniable. There's this belief that if someone hurts you, the only way to regain your power is to hurt them back, to make them feel the same pain they caused you. It sounds satisfying in theory, and emotionally, it feels justified. But in reality, that kind of response keeps you tied to the very thing that broke you in the first place. Revenge is often misunderstood as strength, but it usually comes from a place of unresolved pain. It keeps your focus locked on the person who hurt you. Your actions, your thoughts, even your progress start revolving around them. Instead of moving forward, you're still reacting. You're still connected to them, just in a different way. That connection doesn't give you freedom, it extends the influence they have over your life. Even if you succeed in getting back at them, the satisfaction is temporary, because it doesn't actually heal what was damaged inside you. Knowing your worth operates on a completely different level. It's quieter, less visible, but far more powerful. It's not about proving anything to the other person. It's about understanding, with clarity, that you deserve better than what you experienced. That realization doesn't come easily. It usually follows a period of doubt, where you question yourself, your decisions, and your value. You replay situations, wondering if you could have done something differently, if you missed signs, if you somehow allowed things to reach that point. But over time, if you reflect honestly, You start to separate your worth from their actions. You begin to see that what they did reflects their choices, their priorities, and their character, not your value as a person. That shift is critical, because as long as you tie your self-worth to how someone treated you, you remain vulnerable to their behavior. When you detach from that, you regain control over how you see yourself, regardless of what they did. Walking away becomes a natural outcome of that understanding. Not because you're trying to punish them, but because staying no longer makes sense here, no longer negotiating for respect, attention, or honesty. You're no longer hoping they'll change or suddenly recognize your value. Instead, you recognize it yourself, and that changes your standards. What you once tolerated becomes unacceptable. What you once excused becomes clear. And with that clarity, leaving stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like a necessary decision. There's also a level of emotional discipline involved in choosing self-worth over revenge. It requires you to sit with your anger, your frustration, and your desire to respond without acting on it impulsively. That's not easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest parts of the process. Because reacting would provide immediate release, even if it's temporary. Holding back, on the other hand, forces you to process those emotions in a deeper way. It requires patience, self-control, and a long-term perspective. What makes this approach powerful is that it shifts your focus entirely. Instead of asking how you can make them regret what they did, you start asking how you can rebuild yourself in a way that no longer depends on their presence. Your energy goes into improving your own life, strengthening your mindset, and creating a future that aligns with your values. That kind of growth is sustainable because it's not driven by external validation or comparison. It's driven by internal clarity. Over time, this creates a noticeable difference in how you carry yourself. You become less reactive, more grounded, more selective about who you allow into your life. You don't chase explanations or closure from the person who hurt you because you no longer need it to move forward. You've already reached your own conclusion based on what you experienced. That independence is a form of power that doesn't rely on anyone else's behavior. It also changes how you view the idea of winning after a difficult experience. Winning isn't about seeing the other person suffer or fail. It's about reaching a point where their actions no longer control your emotions or decisions. It's about being able to think about what happened without feeling consumed by it. That doesn't mean you forget or excuse it, but it no longer defines your state of mind. Another important aspect of knowing your worth is the boundaries it creates. Once you understand what you deserve, you're less likely to accept less in the future. You become more attentive to red flags, more aware of imbalance, and more willing to walk away early instead of staying too long. This doesn't make you closed off, it makes you more intentional. You still form connections, but you do so with a clearer understanding of what is healthy and what is not. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this kind of growth. It doesn't need to be announced or displayed. It shows in your decisions, your reactions, and your ability to remain steady even when situations become difficult. People may not immediately see the process that led you there, but they will notice the difference in how you carry yourself. In the end, choosing over revenge is not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about releasing yourself from the need to engage with them at all. It's about recognizing that your time, energy, and focus are better invested in your own life than in trying to balance a score that will never truly satisfy you. And once you reach that point, you realize that the real comeback was never about MIT was about you stepping into a version of yourself that no longer needs their validation or acknowledgement to move forward. At the end of part 4, the viewer should not feel satisfied. They should feel mentally stuck in a question loop. Right now, you ended with, "Connected directly to my wife." That's good direction, but we need to make the viewer's brain itch harder.